Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 16 Plus has been out for over 150 days at this point. Initially, I never did a real review of the phone, and this time around I thought I'd put my own SIM card in it, try it out as my main phone over the past week or so. So I wanted to share some thoughts about it, and as this is seen as sort of a cash grab by Apple by many people due to its lacking of a few different features, I thought I'd talk about how that's affected what it's like to use, and whether or not you should pick one up as well. Now, I do love the feel of it and the lightness of the phone. One thing I noticed initially is when I switched over my eSIM, switched it over to this, I picked up the phone without a case on it and noticed immediately that it was thinner and lighter. Now, it's not terribly lighter. It's 7.03 ounces or 199 grams compared to 7.99 ounces or 227 grams. But I did notice the thickness is slightly different. Even though it's very minor, you can feel it. 0.31 inches or 7.80 millimeters compared to 0.32 inches or 8.25 millimeters. Of course, we don't have the extra camera on the back. And one thing I really like about these phones this year is the color. This is the Ultramarine color. It's probably my favorite this year. Teal looks pretty good as well. And just the overall color with the matte finish on the outside is something that looks great. So that's something I really wish Apple would maybe add to the Pro phones, maybe bring back a blue instead of just having black, natural titanium, white, and silver. I would love to see some color added to that. Bring back blue, maybe any of the previous blues we've had. Either way, it's great to have some color on it, and it's not covered up by a case, so it looks pretty great. Now, the outside of it, again, is glass. We have our camera control here, power, sleep, wake, and then on the left-hand side, we do have an action button this year along with volume buttons, and then on the bottom, USB-C with our speaker and microphone. So very familiar design, and the display is one of the most controversial areas. Now, first though, I'd like to mention PWM or pulse width modulation, as it's the way it controls brightness by flickering the display faster or slower. This doesn't really bother me on this phone. However, it is not at a high enough rate compared to the 16 Pro Max, and it's definitely a little bit slower and will cause problems for those more sensitive to PWM, whether that's headaches, eye strain, or just a feeling of nausea overall. But it is something that could really affect you, that you can see at 240 frames per second compared to the 16 Pro Max where you can't see it at that display rate. But either way, it is there and it may bother some people. The display itself looks great, super bright, super vibrant, has great viewing angles, no issues there. And it doesn't have ProMotion. One of the reasons it's fairly unacceptable for the price. However, it doesn't bother me at all. It took me all of 5 to 30 minutes to get used to it, but there were some other issues I had with it. But the overall display not having ProMotion is something that doesn't bother me at all. Of course, under slow motion, you can see it here, where the overall speed is definitely different. If I put the phones side by side, we'll bring it over to the app library and you'll see the phones are set up identically in every way. If I scroll through, you can see the difference there. And one thing mentioning with the overall design is this rocks on the table quite a bit. Just tap the corner and it shakes, where the Pro doesn't do that. But you can see the overall scrolling is much smoother on the 16 Pro Max, as you would expect. The other thing I noticed right away was the size of the bezels. Again, if I bring back the 16 Pro Max in the same place, we'll go back to the app library. You can see that side by side where the bezels are definitely thicker, something I never thought I'd notice, but I noticed right away. Again, I got used to it and really forgot about it, but it is something I thought I'd mention. I do miss the always on display with the overall display itself. So when it's off, it's completely blank. That may help with battery life, but it is something that I appreciate on the 16 Pro Max, where we have the time here. You can have the wallpaper and just any messages you have, but it is something I utilize and don't have on this phone. It's not the end of the world, but it is something that I did miss. As far as durability though, durability has been pretty great. We have an aluminum frame, we have glass front and back, and on the front, we have a newer ceramic shield. It seems to hold up much better than last year's, with 0 scratches on the display for using it for a week. And even the 16 Pro Max has 1 scratch, and that's from dropping it. So no real issues here. You can't see any others where the previous year's phone, the 15 Pro Max, seemed to scratch just from setting it on a table. This time around, it has no scratches. But if you want to keep your phone safe in more than one way and keep your data safe when online or using public networks, today's sponsor Surfshark has you covered. Now, I have used Surfshark for years when traveling to keep my data safe on public Wi-Fi networks. A VPN or virtual private network shields you from others on networks so they cannot access your data, as it creates an encrypted tunnel which acts as a barrier to those trying to intercept you when online. It can help when you're traveling to access your resources and websites you normally do securely from a different country, even if it's not available in your country typically. Surfshark allows you to connect unlimited devices with your account and has over 3,200 servers in 100 countries. Surfshark also never keeps a log of online data and offers 24/7 customer support. Surfshark also offers antivirus, search, and more. To try out Surfshark for yourself, go to surfshark.com/Zolotech to sign up and get an additional 4 free months of Surfshark when you sign up for a plan. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Now, as I mentioned before with the design, this year we have the action button. It's assignable to many things. I typically just use it for the flashlight. And one thing I noticed on the 16 Plus compared to the 16 Pro Max is we can adjust the brightness, but not the overall beam width. We can do that on the Pro Max. So if I press and hold, we can bring down the brightness and adjust the width of the beam itself. So you can't do that on the Plus, and that's one thing I never really noticed before until I started using it full time. So it's just one thing to note. However, you could use it for shortcuts or any other number of features. We also have camera control this year. Apple brought it to all the phones, and while it's a nice idea, I find that I use it typically just to open the camera. You can use it to zoom and things like that, and if I bring in the 16 Pro Max, you'll see that here. I don't really use it for that. Some people really like this button, others don't. Some people disable it entirely, but it is there if you want to take a photo. Lock autofocus, press to take the photo. I find that the photo typically comes out more blurry or not where I want when I use it as it shakes the phone. It's easier for me to tap the screen, but if you want it, it's something that they've added. Now, cameras this time around have been pretty good. We have a 48 megapixel camera and then an ultra wide, and generally I think it meets most of my needs. We can zoom in 2 times here, but for me, I don't really use the telephoto lens, but if that's crucial to you, of course you'll want to use that. The front-facing camera is the same that we get on the Pro phone, so no real difference there. We just don't have things such as ProRes. However, I find that I don't use ProRes as it uses a tremendous amount of data, and I don't use log either, but you won't have those options here if we go into our camera. So if we go into our camera here, we go into our different options for recording video. Of course, we can record HDR, but we just don't have the Pro options like we do on the Pro Max. So that's something that you may want to consider if you wanted to use it with log footage or ProRes. But other than that, we have our camera control that's fully assignable, adjustable. It can open separate apps and has accessibility features as well that allow for different usages. But either way, it's something that's there if you want to use it, and the video is definitely good enough that you could use it for things such as a YouTube video or just any other video. Fairly impressive video cameras. The photo camera is pretty good, but again, you won't have that telephoto zoom lens. When it comes to battery, so far I've been fairly impressed. It's doing better than I thought it would. If we go into my settings, go to battery, I started with only 2 cycles on this device. Now we're up to 8 cycles with 100% capacity. You can see additional details here with Coconut Battery. It's a Mac app you can download for free outside of the Mac Store or the App Store and gives you additional details. But you'll see here, if we look at the last 9 days that I've been using it, you'll see it says 2 hours and 23 minutes of screen on time, 6 hours and 4 minutes of screen off time. However, the day before, 4 hours and 26 minutes of screen on time, and I used about 55% of the battery. So really no issues whatsoever getting me through a day. In fact, in many cases, it's doing better than my 16 Pro Max. Maybe that's because we don't have ProMotion and the always-on display, so it's using a little bit less battery. But in theory, this should get worse battery than the Pro Max, but for me, it's easily getting me through the day, no problem. So you'll see day to day, I'm using about 4 hours of screen on time typically. I have all of the same apps installed and everything else, so I'm fairly impressed with that. It should get 8 to 10 hours of screen on time, no problem for most people. When it comes to the speakers, they're about the same as the 16 Pro Max. We can take a quick listen to one of my videos. So that was my S25 Ultra versus iPhone 16 Pro Max video, and typically when I show photos and videos, I'll do a montage with some audio in the background, and the overall sound quality is pretty good. At the highest volumes, it's a little muffled, so if you bring the volume down a little bit, it sounds better, and we did peak around 90 decibels or so. At the highest volume, we're regularly hitting 80 to 85 decibels, and it's plenty loud and sounds good. We have good spatial sound and good stereo sound as well. So I think they're great speakers. I've had no issues with them. The same is true on the 16 Pro Max. They're holding up well. We don't have any blown speakers or anything like that so far. When it comes to performance, we have the A18 chip, and the first day of usage was okay, but then it started to lag quite a bit. I initially started on iOS 18.3. I would go into an app, swipe home, it would lag. Maybe go into another app, it would take a little bit to open up and be very laggy in general. That wasn't because of ProMotion, that was just general usage. However, once iOS 18.3.1 came out, it completely fixed most of those issues. The first day it was nice and smooth. The second day it slowed down as it was still processing in the background, but then it seemed to speed right up, and now it's fairly fluid to use. I will say it's definitely not as smooth as a 16 Pro Max with scrolling. You can still notice it, but not as much as I think people would think they would, as you get used to it fairly quickly. But it is something that I notice occasional hiccups and stutters when closing apps or sometimes loading apps. So just going into things such as podcast or maybe going into mail or maybe photos or opening the camera. Typically, it's generally as fast as the Pro Max, but occasional lag here and there. It is noticeable if you've been using a 16 Pro Max, but if you haven't, you won't notice it at all. Of course, we have Apple Intelligence, and I don't typically use that, but because we have the camera control button, we have visual intelligence we can use to identify different objects. We also have things such as writing tools and those sorts of things. I've used writing tools once, but I've really never used anything to do with it. If we could go into Image Playground, have it describe an image and then create it. But in general, I don't really use this too much. It's not something that I care to use as it's fairly cartoony. You could use it for a few different things, maybe some presentations, but in general, I think it has a ways to go. Apple's intelligence, and you may have seen a little bit of a stutter there, but Apple Intelligence in general has been okay, but not as great as some of the competition. Heat has been well managed as well. However, it does get a little bit warm. I notice it seems to dissipate heat a little bit better, at least in my normal use case, than the 16 Pro Max. Maybe that's because it's aluminum and it's getting rid of the heat a little better than titanium. But either way, it seems to stay nice and cool. I've had no issues with that. And connectivity has been great as well. I've placed multiple phone calls with it. Now I only have one bar where I'm at now, but if we turn off Wi-Fi, you can see that here. I have 2 bars of LTE. It will switch to 5G from time to time, just like it did. And I've really had no issues with it. It's been great on phone calls. I've had no dropped calls, and it's stayed connected. The same is true with Wi-Fi and overall Bluetooth. So connecting to AirPods, AirPods Pro, or whatever typically seem to work okay. Now, of course, they're going to be slow. There we go. They were slow connecting there for a second, but I've had no issues with them dropping or anything like that. I've been fairly impressed with it. Now, maybe it has a better antenna because it's not titanium. I don't really know, but either way, it seems like it does a better job than my 16 Pro Max with that. Many people have noticed drop calls and just some odd behavior there. Now, if you're wondering if you should pick up an iPhone 16 Plus, well, at this point, if you're up in the air about it and thinking about a 16 Plus, a 16 Pro, 16 Pro Max, or if you should wait for an iPhone 17, I would probably wait if you're just not sure. The reason is we could get some sort of redesign, and Apple is supposedly getting rid of the iPhone 16 Plus and replacing it with an ultra slim model this coming year, an iPhone 17 Slim or iPhone 17 Air. We're also still supposed to get an iPhone 17, 17 Pro, and 17 Pro Max. Based off my overall experience here, it's okay, but the software is fairly buggy. Now, once the software has worked out all of those bugs and it's nice and smooth, it's a great experience. But with iOS 18.3, it was a big difference between that and 18.3.1. So it's definitely improved, but something that needs to improve some more at this point. It's much better than it was, but it continues to get better. And unless you can get this really cheap or inexpensive or free, I would probably wait at this point. There's a few different things I think Apple should do with this. Reduce the price overall, maybe bring it down a couple $100, add ProMotion, and when you're setting up the phone, maybe have it ask you, do you want to use ProMotion or do you want to save battery, and give an example of both. Also, storage levels should not start at 128 gigs. They should start at 256. Memory or storage is cheap enough at this point. I'm using 96 gigs of storage out of 128, but if I continue to take a lot of photo and video, well, that's going to use up quite a bit. So at this point, I think they should start at 256. That would be fair to most users, good for the consumer, and also add ProMotion, but give the option for it to save battery or enable that. I know it's a pro feature, but every phone, even $500 phones, now have that. So there's not really an excuse there, especially on a $1,000 phone. I do think it's a good phone. I think it's underrated, and I do really love the colors. But let me know what you think of the 16 Plus in the comments below. Of course, if you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.